Good morning, everybody. I hope you can hear me and you can see me. I can see a little bit of myself on the big screen at the very bottom, just down there, right here, where you see my hand. That's the little slice I can see, but that's good enough to know that at least I'm visible. And if everything goes well, we also have the audio. So I think, technically speaking, we are ready to go. I have a few things to share with you before starting the course. First of all, yes, Claudio?
Yes.
Okay. As you can tell, as usual, there are some technical issues, but we should be fine. First of all, please make sure that you turn off your video and that you turn off your audio. If you cannot, we will be forced to ask you to rejoin to make sure that we're not recording also your video. Second point, we are recording, so be careful what you say or what you show, especially what you show. If you turn on your video, we are recording everything. Please be careful. Next, apologies. I am awfully sorry not to be there today in Bologna. For those of you who are there in the room, I'll see you next week. My justification is that I don't have a passport. The American consulate was supposed to return the passport last week. Well, the passport didn't arrive. As a result, I'm stuck in England and I hope to join you by the end of the week. But the first 3 lectures will be entirely online. Now, for those of you who are going to have just the online experience, it won't make any difference. Apart from seeing me here in my studio at home, as opposed to seeing me there in the room in Bologna. For those of you who are planning or are already attending in person, I'm really very sorry not to be there. You cannot imagine how frustrating all this is, rescheduling ticket, etc. But I do plan to see you soon, hopefully by the end of the week, meaning that next Monday, the Monday lecture will be in person. I have a bit of an introduction to the course as next thing before showing some slides and starting doing some real work. Last year, the course was, shall we say, slightly more systematic. It had a narrative that I tried to follow. For those of you who attended that course, you may recall that we had more to cover than time to cover it. This year, I decided to have a slightly different approach. And instead of having an overarching narrative, please turn off your video, Margaret. The course will provide an initial introduction and then some deep dive, meaning that in the second half, and I'll show you in a moment the topics we will cover, instead of going in a sort of overarching narrative, we will go in parallel, driving through or trying to approach issues that are relevant for this digital revolution that we are discussing. One more premise before we start doing some work. I try to make sure that there isn't too much overlap between courses, meaning that for those of you who attended the course last year, there will be some deja vu, but not too much. The lecture today will be part of the deja vu. It's about methodology and how to do the work that we will be doing in the future. In that sense, the main point is just wait, because there will be novelties coming in the next lectures. In terms of what to read, if anything, I'd like to remind everybody who join us today that this course is, as we joked last year, totally useless. meaning that it doesn't give access to credit, points, medals, stars, degrees, certification, or any kind of bureaucratic acknowledgement. We're here just to share ideas, especially once I will be with you there, Q&A and so on, and is an attempt to make sure that we concentrate on ideas as opposed to the value of those ideas, if any, to get a degree. So just to repeat, I know that some of you have asked me, so please do not ask again. This course gives no credits, no points, no stars, no nothing. It's really a meeting of minds. The topics that I'm covering are sometimes work in progress. It will be very useful once I join you there in Bologna to have a discussion, because that's where I learn the most. Some of the points that I'm going to cover have been subject to some thinking longer than in other times, and I published on those topics in the past. For the Italian reading people in this course, you will find most of the things that I have covered already in the past in several books published by Cortina. The Fourth Revolution, The Ethics of AI, The Green and the Blue, and so on. I'm not, let me stress, I'm not suggesting you buy any book whatsoever. But in case you're curious where I publish some of the ideas that I'm covering these days, they are in those books. For the English-speaking people here only, well, you're even luckier than that, because there is no book yet. So no temptation of going and reading something or buying something, but there will be in a matter of months. There are two books, one by Oxford University Press called The Ethics of AI, and the other one by Wiley called The Green and the Blue. But at the moment, there's nothing available. So all you get is essentially me talking. And since I've already done enough in terms of introduction, let's see whether with Claudio, whom I thank profusely. As you can tell, there wouldn't be any lecture if you weren't for Claudio helping me on the other side. So we owe him badly. Now, if everything goes well, I'm going to share the slides, and hopefully you will see what I'm going to see. Still in the process of sharing, so no panic. And now you should be seeing what I'm seeing.
Yeah, we see them.
Yep.
Yep.
Perfect. Okay, so I will turn off the audio feedback. So if anything goes wrong, Claudio, please just send me a WhatsApp, because otherwise there's a feedback loop and it will be a mess. Okay. Perfect. So any communication on WhatsApp, and we are ready to start. This is the first lecture, as clearly indicated, and I'd like to cover first just the topics that we're going to discuss in the following lectures. As you know, this course lasts the whole of June. It will be Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday every week at this time, and in the next week onwards, we will also have more informal seminars in the afternoon. The lectures will be like this, formally, hopefully in presence from next week onwards, for those of you who join me too late at the moment. And the seminars, I plan to have them as more interactive, more discussion-oriented meetings. It's a first attempt. Last year we had invited speakers. I'd like to try a different format. The topics you see here in the next slide will be covered, if everything goes well, and if I don't waste too much time, during the lectures in the morning, Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday. First of all, methodology, which is today and probably tomorrow. It's a bit of a how-to and anticipation of topics that will be covered in the following lectures. Then we start the deep dive, so to speak, on topics that are related to the digital revolution and the ethical debate of this digital revolution. As you can read, we're discussing how the digital revolution has changed our conception of reality. So digital ontology, where ontology for the non-philosophers is the philosophical term to discuss the nature of reality. We'll then move, after having discussed the nature of reality, to the nature of our experience. Topic number 3, the on-life experience, the construction of personal identity, and how technologies, especially digital technologies, have become technologies of hope, hijacking, so to speak, some of the religious vocabulary that we find in other context. New conception of the world, topic 2, new forms of experience, topic 3, new forms of agency. That will be topic number 4. Obviously, that topic has changed significantly since last year, thanks to the arrival of ChatGPT and its cousins. Some of the issues remain the same. In fact, some of the issues have been as old as decades old, discussed already in the 60s. But there's also a lot of novelty, and that will be the next topic in our list. So a new form of agency. Mind already the different angle here, not a new form of intelligence, but a new form of how to do things at zero intelligence. More on this when we will get there with the right slides, etc. All this generates reality, experience, agency, a sense of pressure on how to deal with the problems that we are facing as a society, not individually. That will be topic number 5. We'll be discussing the concept of complexity. We will do that, I'll try to do that in a known rubbish way. These days, as you know, people love to talk about complexity. Most of the things I read, I'm afraid, they seem to be rather shallow. And just in case you were wondering, people like Morin and things like that, I mean, they seem to have just a sense of, oh, big and difficult and very interconnected. Complexity is a scientific term. It's a serious thing, and we will be discussing it seriously. Of course, there are problems related to complexity and its varieties. There are different forms of scientific complexity. One of them has got to do with cooperation, and there's a particular paradox we'll discuss in that lecture covering topic number 5. Cooperation, of course, is a social concept, and that leads to the other topic. Remember, ontology, personal identity, new forms of agency, new forms of cooperation and complexity, new forms of power. In that lecture, we'll cover digital sovereignty, digital citizenship, and if I have done a good job, we still have more time to discuss some more topics. Those are 7, 8, and 9. Mind that we have together 12 lectures and 9 topics. I learned from last year not to be over-ambitious, but if we do a good job and there's enough time, then I would like to discuss very briefly, and that will be a short lecture, the logical trade-off, and in other words, how we reach decisions and we manage preferences by weighing, balancing the pro and the contra. A new form of capital, what I'd like to call semantic capital, meaning that all this transformation in our culture, in our ontology, in our epistemology, in the nature of agency, cooperation, politics, generates also quite a big, deep transformation in terms of how we make sense of things and how we refine their sense of things, meaning semantics. Finally, all this in view of some proactive, constructive perspective. I'd call it the human project. These are all bits of terminology that you may or may not share. Don't worry about that. The important thing is to have a clear sense of what they are covering. And there we'll discuss the concept of a digital utopia or a regulative ideal. Are we able to think of a society that will be ideal there and towards which we would like to move as past cultures and past societies have done? Or are we running out of good ideas these days and all we have is a dystopian from bad to worse? No, you just have to listen to the masters of AI to see how they seem to be incapable, unable to consider a world in which things get better. All they can do is more and more apocalyptic thinking. That is lazy thinking and lazy morality. It takes an effort to think more constructively, and it takes an effort to make a difference for the better. That will be hopefully the conclusion of this course. There I will discuss also the green and the blue as this alliance between or marriage between digital technologies and environmental issues as a positive way of solving both the environmental and the social challenges that are facing the 21st century and ourselves on this planet. As you can tell, there's a lot to cover. I better start covering it. If I realize that there's too much, perhaps we may use one or two of the seminars in the afternoon to catch up with the agenda. Now, this is part of the things that I already shared with you in the past, is the beginning of a very famous book, The Tale of Two Cities. And as you can tell, that was published a long time ago, showing that therefore the idea of a revolution is not new. We live in a certain similar sort of age in which sometimes we feel it is the best of times, and sometimes we really feel it's the worst of times. The digital revolution has been so profound, so widespread, so significant that I leave you the slide for a moment more to read. It generates a spring of hope, but also a winter of despair. And depending on the day, the week, the month, the year, in the past couple of decades, we've been going up and down, yo-yoing between, oh, this is an amazing time, and this is the worst possible time where to live. As you can imagine, it's neither. Of course, the real solution here is to embrace all these difficulties in a constructive way. The joke that I normally crack, and I cracked this more than once in the past, so forgive me, when the usual journalist who thinks in black and white, yes and no, asks you the typical yes-no answer. Are you an optimist? Are you a pessimist? Do you see the glass half full or half empty? The only answer that I recommend everybody is I see it as fillable. It doesn't matter whether you see it half full or half empty. It can be filled. And that is the task of the kind of work that we want to do today. This is just a quick reminder of all the things that have been changed by the digital revolution. Anything from e-health, top left, to economy, bottom right, entertainment, smart cities. I'm just walking around. Education, digital art, cybercrime, security, defense, teleworking and smart working, politics, e-commerce, etc., entertainment, social media. The challenge is to try to identify one single thing that has not been transformed, touched, radically changed by the digital revolution. And normally we think there isn't. That's why this is much more than the car revolution or anything else. It's at the same level as the agricultural revolution and the industrial revolution. Profound, historically deep and long-term transformation of how humanity lives, understands itself, interacts with the world, and interacts with itself. So 4 things: self-conception, conception of reality, interaction with reality, interaction among ourselves. These 4 things have been profoundly changed by the agricultural revolution, by the industrial revolution, and by the digital revolution. The difference, and I'll come in a moment to this slide, is that the agriculture took millennia, the industrial took centuries, the digital is taking decades. So the sense of overwhelming transformation is entirely justified. anyone, and I meet less and less people like that. But trust me, in the 80s, you will still meet, and in the 90s, people who would be telling you, what's the big deal? It's just one more technology among many others, no bigger, no more transformative than the TV, the radio, the cinema. No, this is a cultural and societal transformation of a magnitude that we have never seen before, if not, as I said, in those couple of equally enormous transformations in human history. Now, this digital revolution has one, I would like to share with you, one, it seems to me, has a peculiar way of teaching us lessons. I use here this cleaving power or cut and paste ability of the digital at large to transform things that we have inherited from the past. And I will be telling you more about this in the future, so don't worry about it. It's more of the methodological concepts we need to have that we have inherited from the past as separate, independent, not related. Imagine in the past things that had nothing to do with each other, more or less, say my taste and data and etc. with my personal identity. One of the topics we'll cover in the next lectures. Well, today for us, personal identity, personal data, data privacy and privacy are just the same thing. It's just one block. The digital has pasted, cemented these things into a single unique experience, problem, issue as never before. But it has also separated, made a cut between things that in the past we thought were just a single unity, an entity that was not separable into components. A typical example, and we will cover this during digital sovereignty, etc. lecture, excuse me, is the system of rules, law, legal and normative framework, and the territoriality of what we normally describe as the territoriality of the law. Since modernity onwards, I mean, basically Westphalia and after, we've been shaping the law and territoriality as two sides of the same coin. My place, my rules, your place, your rules. My law ends where the borders of my country end. Clearly, the digital at large has completely cut the law on the one hand and its territoriality to the extent, of course, that you can have, for example, the Google right to be forgotten case, where, as we know, you cannot simply decide that in the whole world European legislation applies. As a matter of fact, one of the problems with the right to be forgotten in the past was precisely how to apply it to Europe without making it totally useless. Well, the truth is that, for example, for any application of the right to be forgotten that you want to bump into, that you meet, you can always bypass it by using a VPN or google.com. Similarly, when the Garante, the data protection agency in Italy, asked OpenAI to block or to stop processing, to be precise, data of Italian citizens, the only way of doing that was to block regionally the service in Italy. But then you could have access to that as long as you had a VPN and a geographically different location through the VPN. So you can tell that now the territoriality of the law doesn't apply anymore. It's not enough to say, look, this is my place, these are my rules. Things have changed dramatically. That leads to digital sovereignty, etc., problems that we will meet in the future. Before I go any further, I'd like to call your attention to one more concept here. This concept of modernity. Modernity has been defined in 1,000 ways, and there's I like to talk of modernity as the very short or the very long. It's like a T-shirt. You know, you have the extra small, extra large. I like the extra large, starting with in the 15 in the 15th century with Columbus and so on. But some people have modernity starting with the First World War. Now, it doesn't matter how wide or the scope of modernity is. It seems to me that the real point, philosophically, is in the line that you find there as a synthesis: the withdrawal of humanity into itself, the age of the I, so the age of anthropocentric humanism. Now, let me tell you a couple of things on this, and then we'll move more quickly. If that sentence is only partially convincing, it means that our modernity starts with the scientific revolution and slightly earlier with Descartes and Galileo. And for the philosophers, especially with Descartes, the meditations, the I reflecting on himself in his case, all the way to the transcendental I in Kant. This withdrawal of humanity into itself means that increasingly, let's say from Descartes onwards, the two fundamental sources of otherness, which are nature and God, start disappearing. They don't disappear immediately. You find plenty of God in the meditations. In fact, you find an attempt to prove the existence of God in Descartes. And nature, of course, will have to wait for the technological rather than just the scientific revolution, the industrial and the technological revolution, to start becoming something that is no longer the ultimate other, but it's something that we control, we shape, we allow to exist. Now, think of the Amazonian forest. It's independent of us, but just because we decided that we want to keep it. Next thing you know, another Bolsonaro will come up and he might destroy the whole thing. God, Nietzsche onwards, has been dead for a while. So modernity, understood as the withdrawal of humanity into itself, is, in different terms, the age of the disappearance of the ultimate other. The other here is, as I said, God, nature. It could be in Spinoza, both. But the point is that this story hasn't ended yet. We are facing, as humanity, the kind of end of modernity. We don't have a good terminology for this, but it's not post-modernity either. It's an age where nature is showing us that we are far from controlling it. In fact, we are totally deluded when we think that we can control nature. Plenty of sort of ways of thinking about environmental issues, as if those environmental issues were up to us to resolve by engineering a new planet, creating life on Mars, etc. We haven't yet learned the lesson that the ultimate other, nature, is way more powerful and way more resilient than we are. There is a future in which, likely future for some people, in which there is a planet Earth flourishing without humanity on it. And we are seeing a resurgence of the ultimate other, as in God, from cultural context, societies, corners of the world with which we fail to engage, because for us, say Europeans, Northern world, rich world, developed world, religion has become something that is domesticated. It's not the God of the Bible, but it's more like a practice, something that we have absorbed within our anthropocentric humanism. God is one of us, is not the ultimate other. Well, we are discovering that for some people, for some cultures, still is a remarkable alternative force in the universe. So much so that you can actually commit suicide to respect that force. So here's the story: modernity as the age of the I, the withdrawal of humanity into itself, increasingly until recently, when the end of modernity is actually the end of the success of this withdrawal. L'Oreal is completely wrong. The whole thing about ethics is not because I'm worth it, but because we need to pay attention both to the spiritual, non-eliminable, non-erasable need of humanity. And I'm not talking as a religious person, I'm not, but more as a matter of fact. And the unerasable, it need to be respected presence of the other pole of this dialectic, which is nature. Now, all this should be in the background so you understand where I'm coming from. But back to us. I told you we need to set up a few sort of conceptual bits around these lectures. I told you a little bit about cut and paste. I told you a little bit about modernity. Another fundamental concept that will be lingering in the background is this idea of a hyperhistory. This is going to be quick. I know that some of you have heard me talking about this way too many times, so apologies. The idea is quite simple. Prehistory is the time when there are no ICTs. It's before any presence of recording tools. Normally that means before writing, and we know that writing has been invented by humanity at least 4 times at different stages in human history, in different places of this planet. Here, around this corner, Europe and Middle East, it was roughly 6,000 or so years ago. Prehistory, therefore, is not a real age, but it's a way of living. It means that a culture lives by having no means of recording the present for future consumption, and the only way of doing that is through biological memory, essentially transmission from grandma to grandson. If you haven't been told by someone, that piece of information is lost forever. We move into a society with ICTs, as I said, around this corner of the world, roughly 6,000 years ago. And those tablets, with which we are all acquainted, they're not holidays. They are records of legal agreements, financial transactions, what you owe me, how much it's the cost of something, etc. History, therefore, starts with writing and recording, and becomes a matter of relating the development of individual and social well-being with the possibility of having records, not only contracts. Think about the monotheistic cultures and religions in, again, the Mediterranean area. They're all religions of a text. No text, no Bible, no New Testament, no Quran, no transmission of teachings. It's very difficult to understand what would happen to those religions. Now, of course, the inspiration, the source of the text is a matter of, shall we say, controversy. But there is to be a text is a must. Now, that relation has increased, has become a dependency. So instead of talking about the end of history, as in the past, a famous book which took a very strange corner and made a big mistake, as if the world was now gently and kindly moving towards all of the same liberal social democracies, open markets, and so on. That narrative doesn't make too much sense to me, but actually this one much more. As we become more and more dependent on not only recording prehistory, not only sharing, disseminating during history, the Gutenberg Revolution, but also automatic manipulation of content. Remember, recording content, disseminating content, manipulating content, our dependency becomes even bigger. And as such, we get more and more history. A label for that will be hyperhistory. If you don't like it, any other would work. But you can see how we are turning the screw of history even more tightly, and not the other way around. Now, if that is the time in which we live, hyperhistorical, therefore, of dependency, well, the space in which we live is definitely a mixed space where the analog and the digital are essentially mix and match. Again, something we covered a lot in the past. I won't spend too much time on this. The Infosphere is where we spend increasingly amount of time, especially in this corner of the world. For anyone who would object, of course, there are hundreds of millions of people, and rightly so. More or less 800 million people who every day don't have access to clean water. And that is a reminder to those people in California that is an existential risk for humanity. 800 million not having clean water. Forget about AI. That is a joke. That is an embarrassment. Is a 1% problem. Well, that reminder is correct. Some of them do not, and many of them do not live in the infosphere. However, and that is important to know, especially for the following lectures, their lives will be determined and are being determined by those who do live in the infosphere. So anyone discussing, for example, the digital divide, I don't forget that a lot of people are on the less fortunate side of that divide. What I want to stress is that their side is being shaped by those who are on the other side, the more, say, fortunate. So we all live in the infosphere either because we're there or because our lives are shaped by those who do live in the infosphere. And that's the space. As a result, our society is a bit of a mangrove society. I use this metaphor because the mangroves grow where fresh water, say a river, meets the salty water of the sea. Asking whether the water there is fresh or salty means not having understood where you live. It's called brackish for a reason. Now, we all live, or increasingly live, in brackish water, in context where the digital and the analog, the online and the offline are mixed. So it's not that one or the other, either you are online or offline, either you are digital or analog. That is a silly debate. Trust me, there's plenty of educational discussion that still operates on that assumption. Political discussions that still operate on the assumption that you are either digital or analog, either online or offline. You log in and you log out. Well, that is a past. It was already kind of false in the 90s. Today is archaeology. In the Mangrove Society, our experience is on life. Another word, another concept. Again, you don't have to use it as long as you share with me the view that which you don't have to agree with. I mean, just understanding where I'm coming from. Our experience, as we will see in one of the lectures, is totally mixed, and it will be increasingly so. If anything, at some point, and I hope that one of the future lectures in one of the future visits to Bologna and the future academic years, I will be able to cover is the hybrid reality that is not just online, offline, analog, digital, but also biological and engineered. We're moving towards more and more hybrid environments. Not getting their point means not being able to find policies that can actually tackle the challenges caused by these hybrid environments. So we live hyperhistorically, time, we live in the infosphere, space, we live in a mangrove society, and we live in terms of experience on life. We have also passed through a fourth revolution. Remember, this is linked to the point about the modernity. Modernity is also the age of displacement, displacement from the center of the universe, Copernicus, from the center of the biological kingdom, Darwin, from the center of the mental life, Freud. Freud put together the previous two, and he said, hello, I'm bringing you a third revolution. Well, the fourth revolution is the one we are undergoing now in terms of not being at the center of the infosphere. Anyone surprised by ChatGPT still doesn't quite get the fourth revolution. It has been going on for about 70 years, almost a century if you wait a little bit longer. How can we possibly be astonished that a piece of software manipulates content syntactically better than anyone else if we know that we've been shifted increasingly away from the centrality of their business? Not the center of the universe, not the center of the animal kingdom, not the center of the mental life, not the center of the infosphere. If you know that, you just expect someone to be more central or at least equally important, for example, AI. So now we share all this space, the infosphere, hyperhistorically, the online experience, etc., with artifacts that can do things better than us, faster, more efficiently, more effectively. The point that really we need to address is, what about us? So what remains for us in terms of self-conception. And I hope to cover this in the following slides, but essentially is to work at the periphery. The important thing is to grow up, stop thinking that we are child and that the party is for us. We are the ones who organize the party. It's not our party. It's, remember, L'Oreal, because I'm worth it, is totally modern. And if you are stuck with that, you're still astonished that GPT does a better job than you do when it comes to summarizing an article. But if you think in terms of being at the service of, at the periphery of, that what really matters is, for example, deciding not how to answer some questions, but what questions should be asked, what priority some contents should get, etc. Well, this sense of being at the service of, that seems to me the real destiny of humanity. And I won't emphasize that enough during the rest of these lectures. Having said that, I'm not sure it will be one of the main focus when we'll cover the other topics. But remember, we're not at the center of any of the four spaces, and we should stop trying to put ourselves at the center of anything. So anyone who still hears, excuse me, some kind of sad attempt to regain centrality, for example, in terms of customer-centric or human-centric or mentally, psychologically, etc., centered on something. Well, remember, this is a battle we have lost too many times not to learn the lesson. Stop thinking in terms of centrality, start thinking in terms of being at the service of, the periphery of. And then we will find much better foundations for the human exceptional nature. But more on this in the future. Meanwhile, all this and what I told you in the past 20 minutes or so has generated a huge earthquake in our foundations. The beautiful Greek temple here is to remind us that for some time, especially during modernity, we've been increasingly relying on the idea that a lot of the components that we're putting together in the modern time, now remember the age of the eye, were not only compatible, but mutually supportive, like columns of a temple. In fact, I had a discussion with a UN representative of human rights a long time ago, and he had exactly that metaphor. He said, no, Luciano, we were discussing during the right to be forgotten debate in Europe, and he kept saying, look, human rights are like columns of a temple. They are mutually supportive, they are complementary. And my point was, not really, and I'll show you in a moment why not. That was the hope or maybe delusion of modernity. In fact, we are realizing, thanks to the digital revolution, that they don't get along. But let me step back first. This foundational crisis is profound and is widespread. It's normative. You just have to open the newspapers to know that the ethical, legal frameworks that we have inherited from the past need to be revised and revised quickly and profoundly. We don't know really how, but we will find a solution. The first point, as for anyone being sick, is to acknowledge that there is a problem. Now, trust me, during the 90s and even recently, there was an attempt to make sure that we're just more of the same. All we need to do is to apply the laws that we have. Say, for example, GPT moment of crisis made international news, BBC, Reuters, when it was blocked in Italy. The attempt to use the GDPR to deal with privacy and data protection and copyright when not dealing with a database, but dealing with a piece of software that has learned from a database, but not using a database, it's a little bit of an attempt to try not to see the foundational crisis. It's a bit like saying, look, we have a good piece of legislation, why don't we apply that full stop? Well, because we probably have to rethink even more what we need to do. Not that the GDPR is not a good piece of legislation, but we need the AI Act, which is coming, so that we might have a more updated and applicable piece of legislation to deal with challenges that have undermined some of the foundations that we inherited from modernity. Epistemological and cultural, the way we understand, we know, we share information, well, that has been hugely, and I don't need to stress this, hugely challenged. And of course, political, as we will see during these lectures. So the digital is, of course, transforming our life so profoundly that is generating a foundational crisis as, well, rarely seen in human history. Let me give you an example of why the columns of the temple of our modernity are not mutually supportive anymore. In fact, they sometimes fight each other. And we get a little bit closer to digital ethics. This is, and I'll show you another slide very similar to this, what has happened in the past few years. We want to have all the squarish things. We want to have security. We like to have privacy. We want to protect self-determination. We want to have freedom of expression and information. In fact, we want to have freedom of congregation and socializing, etc. But the Apple FBI, and I hope, I won't go into details, I hope that at least one example speaks to each of you. The Apple FBI discussion and debate between security and privacy, should Apple allow the FBI to look into an iPhone, etc., shows that security and privacy, we need to find a balance, a trade-off, remember, one of the lectures. The right to be forgotten, right in the middle, RTBF. On the one hand, freedom of expression and information. Of course, we should be free to link to anything that is legally available online. And yet the privacy of the individual to whom that information refers also needs to be protected, another compromise. Snowden, how much do we want to have in terms of security, but also freedom of expression and information? And further down, Cambridge Analytica, well, self-determination on the one hand, but also freedom of expression and information on the other. Now, of course, the story goes on, and the next episode is Trump, parallel, and safety. Of course, the freedom of speech needs to be protected, freedom of expression, and at the same time, the safety of individuals. When people died because a president of the United States was, shall we say, less than careful in what he was saying online, not only through parallel, but especially through Twitter. Where do you put the right balance? That is a difficult question. The previous point, however, should be quite clear. The idea that safety, security, freedom of expression, privacy, self-determination, right to assembly, etc., are all mutually compatible and self-reinforcing among each other, it's a dream, it's a joke, it's a modernity sort of utopian, best scenario, narrative that doesn't hold on the ground. The example here is like having had a lot of friends for a long time, thinking that all those friends were friends among each other. And then the digital organizes the ultimate party and they hate each other. They don't get along. So for us who are no longer subject to that modern narrative, the real question, which I told you a moment ago, becomes how do we make them compatible? Where do we find the right balances between all this and more to come? Well, that is one of the things that we will cover in the lectures, but it is an open question. And I'm afraid I don't have yet, I wish, a simple and convincing answer. All this generate bigger problems. I put some of the specific issues under in the sort of orange, Google right to be forgotten, FBI, Apple, GDPR, and for example, we could put there OpenAI, Facebook post-truth, etc. What that is prompting, the blue side, is a reconsideration and therefore a reshaping, a redesign of some of the fundamental lines of thinking that we have inherited from modernity. Google, the right to be forgotten, has made us reconsider a post-Westphalian order. The FBI, Apple, etc., foundational crisis in human rights. The GDPR, for example, including recent episode with OpenAI, a new way of structuring our society, having an infrastructure that leads to more rather than less ethical behavior, a new infraethics, something that we will cover hopefully in the following slides. And the post-truth with with Facebook, etc., prompts the question: what kind of society we want to build? What kind of world we want to have? I don't want to be the optimistic at all cost kind of guy, but as they always say, every crisis should not be wasted. It's an opportunity. This is a big crisis, and therefore is a big opportunity. A big opportunity to rethink profoundly the human project, what humanity wants to be, what kind of a world we want to live in, what sort of relationship we want to have with big capital O, the other, religiously, in terms of tolerance, for example, and naturally in terms of respect and sustainability. Well, that human project is in the making, and I think there's a risk that we might just stumble upon it unreflectively, that we will not exercise enough philosophical thinking ahead before actually doing things, that we might start, and probably we have already inadvertently, implicitly, started developing a human project for the 21st century without even thinking too much about what exactly we want to have and obtain. Well, that is, if you like, part of the reason why I'm excited to give this course in Bologna. It enables more thinking about all these issues. And we finally have done with the introductory stuff, the pinpointing or highlighting some of the concepts that we need to have. And let me stress once again, there is no attempt here to convince anyone that I am right uncritically or just believe me. It's more an attempt to make clear where what I'm going to tell you comes from. So if you disagree, if anyone is unconvinced, they know exactly what they disagree about, why they disagree, and how things can be improved. So hopefully I might be convincing, but the worst thing that could happen would be to be obscure or to sell points implicitly without making a clear effort to be totally transparent. Now, with that transparency out of the way and some terminology clarified, here is some of the things that we need to cover today and tomorrow. Remember, tomorrow will also be part of this lecture. About digital technology and digital ethics, what difference it makes in terms of ethical thinking about all the things that we just covered a moment ago. From what perspective we're going to develop a digital ethics analysis. What mechanisms are available to us to do more and better digital ethics? What tools? What do we do that for? What risk we run? And so what at the end? So all this, in other words, to say, when we do some ethical analysis of the issues that I highlighted in the past half an hour or so, what kind of questions we need to address methodologically? I'll cover this. I hope they will be sufficiently exhaustive, but there may be more, and I leave them to the Q&A when we will meet in Bologna. So what difference does it make? Well, let me start from a super classic. I'll leave you for a moment to read what's on the slide. The picture is a commemorative picture of Rosa Parks, and the gentleman behind is a journalist. Of course, that's not the real picture when the event happened. It's December 1st, 1955, and in Alabama, Rosa Parks, decides not to follow the law. She doesn't relinquish her seat in the color section, etc. The story is very famous. This shows one fundamental point, that sometimes in some debates, especially in corners where the law is okay, we forget the law can be totally wrong. For anyone who needs a reminder, we got apartheid in South Africa, fascist law in Italy, Nazi laws in Germany, and on and on and on. So the law is something that needs to be taken into account, but it's not enough, it's not sufficient. If you think that this is an overemphasized point, just a few months ago, I had a meeting, in fact it was December, if I remember correctly, here in London, with the representative of the Data Protection Agency here. The meeting started with his presentation, and his presentation was exactly what I told you is not the case. There is no need for ethics. We have the law is enough. Stop being silly, essentially. Do not waste time. When there is the law, ethics can go on holiday. And if there is no law, that means that that's okay. So either there is a law and the law tells you what to do or not to do, or anything else is legal because it's not regulated. Of course, the person in question got a full drilling, and because I was next, and I proved how profoundly wrong, embarrassingly wrong that person was. This is how ethics interacts with the law. There may be other ways, but these are the fundamental ones. First of all, ethical thinking, the thinking about what is right and wrong, what is a good or bad behavior, what values we want to implement, what virtues or vices we want to have or avoid, shapes any legal regulation, framework, shapes the law. It's not the only force, of course, that shapes the law. There are many, many others, but certainly is one of them. It therefore also changes the law. It tells us that maybe a law is not quite right, maybe it's outdated, maybe it's totally wrong. See what happens when you sit on a bus in Alabama. It also helps us to interpret the law, because when the law is unclear or doesn't say enough, is only partial, leaves room for different interpretations, well, how do we go about, if not through a better understanding, ethically speaking, of what the maybe legislator wanted to say or the law was supposed to achieve? It enables us to do much more than is strictly required. That is crucial. Think in terms of minimum salary. That's what the law establishes, but it doesn't say that you cannot pay people more. Or say with a bonus for Christmas because of the great performance. And I'm talking about not the CEO. I'm talking about the people employed by the CEO. Likewise, if you could do much more than is strictly required on the motorway. If you see someone in trouble, the law doesn't ask you, doesn't force you to help that person in trouble, but that is the ethical thing to do. It also enables you to do much less than is allowed. Sometimes the law can be rather generous. We have had plenty of scandals here in the UK where the law, strictly speaking, was allowing members of the parliament to spend money on things that they really should not have spent the money on. Well, it was legal, but it was very unethical. And that is what ethics enables you to do. Of course, all this means that ethics first and law afterwards. But what is exactly the relationship? And again, we're building a little bit of a methodology here. Well, you often find that people talk about regulations, ethics, governance as if it were all the same, but it isn't. When we talk about ethics, we are better talking about alignment to avoid confusion, and what is acceptable, preferable, socially speaking, in terms of values. Regulations prompt immediately the thought of compliance. There are set of rules, and you need to do things according to the rules. Governance covers also ethics and regulation, but could be something else. For example, it could be the agreement within a company in terms of who does or does not have access to certain kind of information. It has got nothing to do with the law, say it's just a matter of practicalities, and of course it's not an ethical decision. Excuse me. So as long as we are clear in our minds, this this Venn diagram with three different areas, they have plenty of overlapping bits, but they're not the same. More precisely, you can tell it's the same picture. You have on the ethics side, bottom left, both soft and hard ethics. I'll tell you more about that distinction in a moment. On the right, regulations. The regulations are actually what, and I told you something different a moment ago, so I hope it is not confusing. Regulations are on the other side, also what constrains ethics. That's when we talk about soft ethics. This will be covered in the next few slides more precisely, so don't worry about the initial difficulty. But if you think in terms of hard ethics as the ethics that does whatever needs to be done independently, no matter what the law says, and as soft ethics as what comes after the law, after compliance, well, that's where regulations end up constraining soft ethics. And of course, as I told you before, top left, hard ethics influences regulations and make sure that regulations are aligned with social acceptability and preferability. Now, moving towards this distinction of soft and hard ethics, compliance is necessary but insufficient, as I told you before. Otherwise, anyone would be a fantastic tennis player. If playing according to the rules were enough, we would be all champions, but it isn't. It's necessary, of course, otherwise you can't play tennis, shall we say, or you can be a decent citizen. But it is insufficient, meaning that there's much more to win the game. So one way of describing ethics is what makes the difference between what is necessary, say a decent legislation, and what has to be added so that a decent legislation leads to a winning game, ethically speaking. That is the rest that needs to be done. For that to happen, we need to have this soft and hard ethics distinction clear in mind. So a step back. We have regulations. Regulations, imagine, are like the rules of the game. You need to abide by the rules. In other words, compliance. If you are a company and there is the GDPR, you need to follow the GDPR if you are in Europe or interacting with European data, etc., etc. Perfect. Is that good enough? No. You can and should probably do much, much more. Now, suppose, for example, that OpenAI is in question. And suppose that OpenAI now is compliant with the GDPR. Could OpenAI do much more to protect, for example, underage users? Of course it could. Could it do much more to protect the copyright of, say, text? Obviously. Or decide what happens, say, with DALL-E in terms of reproduction or production of images. Of course, he could do much more. Is he doing it? I'm not quite sure, probably not, because compliance is supposed to be sufficient enough, but it isn't. Now, when it comes to this soft ethics, therefore, imagine soft ethics as all that can be done more over and above the strict compliance, is playing good tennis, not just playing according to the tennis regulations. There's a lot that can be done, but it doesn't come without constraints. So on the left-hand side, you see a blue line labeled time. So through time, imagine that this the green space is moving up through time. We have more and more feasibility, more and more things can be done. We can have brain implants, for example. We can have more, better, more successful driverless cars, drones that bigger, more powerful, etc., etc., as the feasibility of our world, and I'm just referring now to the digital world, but of course that applies to anything, increases, that sort of base becomes larger and larger. The space of soft ethics is constrained on the one side, left-hand side, by human rights. Whatever you do in terms of over and above to win your ethical game, according to the rules, has to respect human rights, as we all agreed more or less on this planet. Declaration, UN, etc., and the different versions that you have around the world. At the same time, if you live, this if is fundamental, don't forget, if you live in a decent society where the law is okay and you don't need hard ethics to change it, to oppose it. In other words, if you're not in Alabama in 1950, then soft ethics can rely on and be constrained by compliance. So soft ethics is feasible, respects human rights, and is post-compliance. The feasibility for the ethicist in the group is a simple reference to an axiom, shall we say, in what the philosophers call the ontologic, but it could be just a principle they use all the time in any ethical analysis. If you ask someone to do something, that something must be doable. I know it sounds a little bit silly, but you cannot ask someone to do something that is not doable. That would not be ethically acceptable. Now, there's plenty of that. Unfortunately, society often forces people to do something that is not possible, which means, therefore, that people find a solution. It could be illegal solution, or, for example, stop doing that completely. Now, imagine, go back to the OpenAI and the Garante, the agency, data protection agency in Italy. If I ask you to stop processing immediately all the data of Italian citizens, am I asking you something that you can do? Not really. The only solution is to stop providing the service completely. So that is, in a way, an application of, if you ask someone to do something, that something must be doable, but at the same time, it provides such a constraint on the feasibility that essentially is just another way of saying, turn it off. That's why all the debate about, the Garante didn't really force OpenAI to turn off ChatGPT is silly. Once you have the feasibility and the compliance, one way of describing soft ethics, more in the following slides, and we're almost at the end of our lecture for today, is another way of saying the ethics, there is post-feasibility, post-compliance. Is there enough to do once you respect the human rights, your post-feasibility, your post-compliance? Oh yeah, there's plenty of gray areas, empty areas, and fillable areas where we don't either have a clear sense of what needs to be done, gray areas, there is no legislation, full stop, or any ethical debate, so we can do more in terms of soft ethics, and the space has been left empty in between. The legislation, for example, about drones is still in the making. Consider, as we speak, the AI Act. One of the major areas left empty, completely untouched by the AI Act, is defense. The use of AI in war zones, for example, in conflicts, defense, etc. Speaking to the expert here, Professor Taddeo, she reminded me that, of course, that is probably because it's a NATO problem. It's not just an EU problem. Having said that, if the EU will find itself facing ethical, legal, say, normative issues in the use of AI in a defense context, well, the best thing that will be available as we speak, because it's a gray area, because it's empty, and because it's fillable, will be a lot of soft ethics. Post-compliance, for example, in line with the AI Act, in line with the Digital Services Act, with the Digital Markets Act, with the General Protection GDPR, the General Data Protection Regulation, but it will have to be also something that will design solutions in an empty areas that needs to be addressed. Now, these are just examples, and they are at the sort of big policy level, but it also applies to everyday life, individual, company, family, and so forth. Now, for some now actual terminology. And by the way, remember, all this is recorded, so in case you can go back to it. So digital ethics, as described so far, is a new branch of ethics, studies and evaluates moral problems related to data, algorithms, practices, infrastructures, and it tries to formulate and support morally good solutions. The last point. I hear often people talking about philosophy, ethics as important because it asks questions, which is true. But trust me, asking questions is only half the job. You need to provide answers. Anyone who's stuck with, oh, philosophy is the art of asking questions, hasn't quite really understood the history of Western philosophy from Socrates onwards, which is all about providing answers. Let me just cover another slide, and we have a good point where we can stop and then get some question time. Of course, digital ethics builds on decades of work. It used to be called computer ethics, 80s and 90s. Then it became information ethics. Of course, these days you have AI ethics, machine ethics, and so on. It's all the same stuff anyway. It's all ethics of digital transformations, impact, technologies, business models, strategies, policies. We better have a single terminology, and I think this is a sufficiently solid one. To the extent that, as some of you may know, a bit of biography, I'm moving from Oxford to Yale. I will keep Bologna, so I'll be coming back to Bologna regularly. But when I was asked by Yale how to call the new center, I insisted to call it a Center for Digital Ethics, Digital Ethics Center, DEC, precisely because that way we can be open to new transformations and we're not stuck with either a piece of technology, computer, or some kind of content, information, or a particular application, AI ethics, because we might be discussing digital sovereignty, or we might be looking into underwater cables and what they mean for digital sovereignty. But we might also need to talk about content moderation or platform governance and so on. The whole thing needs to be included, because working on each topic separately, it will not provide that sort of overall understanding that is needed. All this from an ecological, meaning systemic approach. Remember, we need to keep in mind the other, which is not just nature, but all the environments in which we are operating. So digital ethics as something that discusses the ethics of data, algorithms and AI, practices, infrastructures, but understanding all this in a way that makes systemic and ecological sense. The soft ethics is just a quick reminder, and I definitely want to leave some time for a couple of questions. So let me see if we can get to a good point here. For anyone who hasn't done much so ethics in terms of courses and so on, just a reminder, we need to make clear that there's a distinction between what can be done, that's the feasible. No, I can kill someone, maybe with a knife. Okay, it's just doable. What may be done, in other words, what is allowed or not allowed by the law. No, you may not. I can, but I may not. And what should be done, or you should, because you are defending yourself. So I can kill someone, I may not kill someone, but I should kill someone. These are three different ways of discussing the same episode: feasible, legal, ethical. Remember, unfortunately, quite a number of people keep sort of mixing the three, generating more confusion. Once we have that in place, a reminder of what I told you before. Soft ethics assumes a feasibility first and compliance first approach. It looks at what may be ethically recommended over and above the scope set by what may be legally and feasibly done. Remember, not the playing tennis. What more can be done because I need to win this game, not just playing according to the rules. And it can be done beyond legislation, but not against it or not despite its scope. It's a post-compliant approach and it has several advantages, but we will see the advantages and why it is important tomorrow. I'd like to stop here and see whether, thanks also perhaps to Claudio, there might be a couple of questions, and then I promise there will be more interactions, especially once in Bologna. But I stop sharing the slides and leave room for the Q&A. Now we have a hand. Maybe I let Claudio handle the Q&A.
Victoria, we have a question from Victoria. If you can use your microphone, Victoria.
Yes, thank you. Good morning. Thank you for this really extremely interesting lecture. I have one question, and apologies if it might sound naive. But what do you exactly mean when you talk about ethics? Because we know that ethical principles may vary significantly in space. For example, something that from a European social perspective can be totally acceptable, can be totally unacceptable if seen, for example, from a Chinese or Japanese individual, because their sense of respect and interaction with the society is completely different from ours. So my question is, what set of rules do we exactly refer to when you refer to ethics? Thank you. You are on mute, Professor Floridi.
Thank you. Quite rightly put him in mute by Claudio. Quite rightly. No, thank you. So let me stress a few points here. Point number one. The disagreement between different cultures and societies in terms of ethics is overemphasized. If we take fundamental values, the ones, for example, that you find described in the UN Declaration of Human Rights, signed, by the way, by almost everybody and his uncle, it's often the case that we find a lot of agreement on the value, for example, of safety, of privacy, of the right to express one's own ideas freely, the right to have fair treatment in front of a court of justice, the possibility of getting together when you want to express your views, and so on. So point number one, to be rectified in a moment. We have a lot of agreement, at least on paper. Point number two. Unfortunately, all these big sort of concepts get interpreted very differently. I will never forget, I was at UNESCO and the Chinese ambassador was giving a speech about privacy. And it was amazing. I mean, it was a long speech, and he was defending privacy and freedom of speech as well at the time. Like, I had to double check, and it was the Chinese ambassador. Of course, no prejudice and everything on my side. See, no, we all completely agree. I mean, it was like, yes, I signed it. And then halfway through, he started talking about how that had to be counterbalanced by social security and safety. And by the end of the talk, we had lost a lot of the privacy and freedom of speech, and there was a lot of social security and safety. So the trick is not so much the big words, but how we interpret those big words and ground them in social reality. That's point number two. So agreement on big concepts, yes. Grounding those big concepts in everyday practices, oh, that is where the disagreement starts. Point number three, there's right and wrong. And I will never, ever accept any relativism of any sort. Because the way, for example, in some countries, women are treated is not just a matter of their culture, our culture. It's just a matter of they are wrong and we are right. Point number 4, tolerance towards people who are wrong. We need to be tolerant. In other words, wait for them to change their minds. But wait we will, but change their minds they have. So the world is getting, hopefully, a place that is a bit more decent if we have those values that I said in point number 1, if the grounding of those values is a bit more coherent with their actual nature, point number 2, if we accept that there is right and wrong, and some cultures and some societies are just on the wrong side of history, slavery, child labor, lack of rights for anyone else who is not the white male husband, those are societies that need to change. We will do, point number 4, gently and kindly. We'll do that with tolerance, but firmly, without ever accepting that my culture, my ethics, mind your business. Not at all. I think that if we have these 4 points in mind clearly, then life becomes much, much easier. I like to stress, despite my tone of voice and my language, the tolerance side. We need to be tolerant because we are all guilty. There is no culture on this planet that has not made immense ethical mistakes. And Europe is the worst offender. So if we know better because we have done worse, we should use that knowledge to make sure that other people don't make the same mistakes. We are the place that industrialized slavery, that caused 2 world wars. And if you put together the US, we are the place that dropped 2 atomic bombs on 2 cities. We have 0 lessons to teach, but we have a lot of bad experience to share. Auschwitz is not to be found anywhere else but in Europe. So for all those reasons, including religious fights, crusades, I mean, Europe, largely understood, or Western countries, are like the ultimate nightmare in human history. We need to leverage that to make sure that it doesn't happen anywhere else. So I said, no lessons to teach, but a lot of experience to share and lead by experience, lead by example, so that people will see that human rights are taken seriously now in this corner of the world, because we have seen so darkness and so much worse that anyone else should not go there as we have. If that is what you had in mind, then the last point is be careful to anyone who, when they give a speech, they talk about ethics, thinking that in English that is plural, is singular. It's like mathematics. It's one of those funny things about English. Ethics is, mathematics is, and that's all I wanted to stress. We still have a bit of time for maybe more questions. I don't know if there's any other hand up.
Monique. We can see you, but we cannot hear you.
What about now?
Okay.
Another opportunity. My question is related to the choice of the word compliance instead of accountability. I'm not sure if I've missed during the explanation in the lecture today, but like when you're talking about compliance, why can we talk about accountability as well? And if no, why not? Thank you.
Thank you. That is a good question. Enables me to clarify some of the language. So when you have some rules, whatever the rules are, playing according to the rules, metaphorically speaking, is called in legal terms compliance. And in terms of ethics, I said we better be careful not to use compliance, because if you speak to any expert, as soon as you talk about compliance, the expert will start thinking in terms of legislation. So that's why, for example, in the past, even when we were in Europe, in Brussels, we were working as the high-level group on the ethics of AI, we preferred speaking about alignment. It's the same idea. Set of rules already there. Are you following the rules or not? So following the rules or abiding by the rules, playing according to the rules, that is, legally speaking, compliance. Ethically, better use the word alignment, but it doesn't matter, and as long as we understand each other. Accountability is a different concept. Of course, is related, and there allow me to make things a little bit more difficult. We have three concepts, unfortunately, overlapping and often used as synonym: responsibility, accountability, and liability. It's essentially referring to the point of who pays if something goes wrong. If you are not, for example, following the rules, if you're not compliant, and someone can prove that you did something wrong by not being compliant with a piece of legislation, what is your degree of liability, legally speaking? Do you pay a fee? Do you go to prison? Are you excused? So, what is your level of accountability? The accountability normally refers to, if you want to be very precise, to the cause and effect chain of who did what and it was accountable for what. Let me give you a silly example. Suppose that someone smokes in the room where Claudio is. Smoking in that room is not allowed. And someone says, "Oh, Luciano, you are accountable because you were giving the lecture there." And I said, "Look, I wasn't even there. I was online. So it's Claudio's fault." He is accountable for not making sure that people don't smoke in the room. Cause and effect. And then there's responsibility, which is a very much an ethical concept, covers the same area. Like, whose fault is that if something goes wrong? Mind that final point. These three, the more causal effect kind of epistemological concept, accountability, the more legal concept, liability, and the more ethical concept, no, whose fault is that, morally speaking, they are normally used negatively. But in theory, they could also be used positively. You are responsible for the success of something, or someone, and it's a joke, the legal people in the room, the legal scholars will be horrified by this, but you could be liable for the success of a company. In a way, when the CEO gets all their money, in theory, being responsible, accountable, liable for all the risks, the justification is that since things went very well, he gets the money. So it's the counterpart of, if you like, the liability, responsibility, accountability. But this family of concepts, and I try to give you a bit of extra semantics around them, but they are very much used sometimes interchangeably, so don't worry about it. The three concepts are totally linked, but different from compliance and alignment. If you don't comply, then you are liable. But the liability responsibility is what happens if. So if I don't play according to the rules, for example, tennis-wise, well, I'm responsible for or accountable for, liable for, say, a penalty point or something. I hope this helps a little bit. It's a bit of a sort of mapping the concepts in a way that I hope takes.
Thank you. Yeah, it was very clear.
Okay, excellent. Thank you. Final questions, and we stop here. Maybe.
There is Riccardo Schiavone.
Hello. Thank you. Hello.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Part.
No,
Like
we can hear you. Riccardo, we cannot hear you.
That you're not in the center of, basically anything anymore. I still feel like there is some resistance about our intelligence.
Let's try another one, because this is impossible. I'm sorry, but we can't hear you properly.
Professor?
Yes.
Morning. My question is about the possible framework available by the digital ethics, what has to offer on the hard ethics side. With that new framework that is being constructed, should actually it would be a necessary confrontation or questioning about political systems, economical systems, or this framework would be only restrained in the ontological, human, and ethical areas. If you could explain a little bit more about it.
I'm not sure I caught the question properly. So let's see if I got it right or not. The hard ethics side is what we started the conversation about whose ethics and which ethics is the right ethics, and it's a long journey. Humanity has made a lot of steps forward, especially negative steps. Today, I doubt anyone can sincerely believe that slavery is okay, or that human cruelty is okay, or that different human beings have different rights, or that it's okay to pay a woman and a man for the same job and the same task and the same skills differently because one is a man, the other was a woman. I mean, all these things that we take for granted, but it has taken centuries, millennia to develop. So humanity is on this journey to refine its ethical understanding of what's right and wrong. And it's a good journey, I hope. So it's a journey of successful steps in understanding. We're not talking about application. Application is a long way to catch up. But unless in understanding was okay, we have made progress. Now, that hard ethics gets at some point implemented in bits of legislation, which are not just a matter of agreeing on which side to drive in a country, because that is just a convention. Left, right, whichever way you want. And it's not about a convention about what kind of electricity you want to have, 110, 220, it doesn't matter. But it's more about what values that society wants to see implemented. Now, the next step in terms of the hard ethics implemented legally, politically, socially, is a matter of negotiation between different countries and different cultures. And that's where things start getting difficult and the friction emerges. It's something that was linked to the first excellent question. How do we make sure that, for example, legislation passed in Europe based on European values is compatible and is not in contrast with legislation passed on, say, in China or India or Brazil or United States, which might differ? I would argue that often there is room for agreement and compatibility. Just because you base, say, your legislation on privacy on human rights and human dignity on the one hand, and Europe on market competition and antitrust on the other, it doesn't mean that we cannot converge on the same solution. Different roads, same place where we end up. But sometimes it is a matter of acknowledging the incompatibility of solutions. At that point, as I stress, toleration is essential, but also what we're going to see, and that's what I want to add, given your question, what we're going to see is, and I'm not saying this with a positive tone of voice, I'm just saying what is going to happen, whether we like it or not, is influenced by the markets and influenced by the so-called Brussels effect. If a solution doesn't make too much sense with the markets, it will find, as a matter of fact, and I'm not saying this in any sort of happy sense, unfortunately, a solution that doesn't meet what the markets want, it will have a more difficult life. That's when hard ethics is necessary, to push and push and push to make sure that the right thing happens despite the markets. The Brussels effect is, if you like, a similar counterpart. Something that has been approved and has become a legislation in Europe starts driving any other piece of legislation around the world because it's easier for the markets just to comply, abide, follow the rules of the game established in Europe, and then decide, you know what, if I play according to those rules, I play according to the rules everywhere in the world. So what the markets want and don't want, and what the Brussels effect does or does not generate, is a matter of pragmatics, like literally what happens once you have decided what's the right thing or the wrong thing that should happen. Negotiation there is inevitable, and unfortunately, conflict and clash of cultures and civilizations is something that we are going to see for a long, long time. I still hope and believe that with toleration and a lot of rationality, we will be able to converge, but the convergence is far and distant in the future. That does not mean that it's not possible, and it does not mean that therefore anyone can do whatever they wish, because place you go, ethics you find, or legislation is as good as any other because it's my place, my rules. That is something that I'm not stressing, I'm not saying we should not accept. I'm not sure whether I capture your question entirely. I hope I was close enough.
Professor, yes, my question was very broad. I was thinking about, for example, linked to the previous questions, let's say a process of social scoring able to read and interpret the human behavior at all in some societies, let's say China, and comparing some products available there, sold to the West, let's say, but Europe now is with the Digital Act, the AI Act, and the GDPR, and so. But you answered quite clearly in that sense that would we need agreements and maybe some conflicts in that area. That was my idea. Thank you.
Thank you. I mean, there's a bit of a test that we could run in our minds sometimes. I know some of you might be acquainted with Rawls' veil of ignorance. It's something a little bit like that. When we're talking about a society, a culture, or a legal framework within which people live, the question we want to ask is, would you be happy to be born in that context? If you could choose, where would you like to be born? In a society that respects LGBT, for example, or in one it doesn't? In one when everybody has the same rights, women, men, any color, any religion, any preference for food or not? Where would you like to go if you could emigrate in any place? And no, it's something that I remind our colleagues, especially in Italy, especially given the right-wing government that we have today. We should be proud that people like to come here as opposed to fly away from here. It's a place that is attractive, and that should be a good reminder in terms of what people hope to get here as opposed to what they have at home. So in a way, one could run a bit of a test and say, well, let's see how many of the 8 billion people or so in the world would like to live in country A, B, C, D, etc. And I'm afraid I think Sweden will be overcrowded, all places like that, where there's much more of the sort of tolerance and respectful human dignity that we have seen elsewhere. In other words, when people can choose, when people know enough and can choose enough, they don't choose to be in a country where, for example, freedom of speech is not respected, etc., etc. But I'm over stressing a point that I think is clear enough. Next question, because we still have some time.
Riccardo, if you want to try again, because with your microphone, otherwise I can read the question, because we text in the chat. Okay. You mentioned we need to grow up and accept we are not in the center of basically anything. There still seems some resistance into thinking that our intelligence is special, even though the pool of tasks we can do and machines can't has been constantly. You cannot hear it?
It's too
this is the issue with the root.
yeah.
Riccardo, do you want to try again?
Okay, let's try. Can you hear me now? Is it working now?
Yeah.
I still hear a lot of echo, but let's try. So yeah, it's about us, not being in the center of the universe anymore. And I still feel like there is some resistance into thinking, to wanting to still believe that our intelligence is special. And so we have seen that machines can do more and more, and even some tasks that up to 2 years ago seemed so far away now are possible. And of course we're not close to replicating using human intelligence. And when you look into ChatGPT, how it works, it's maybe even a little bit disappointing. It's just the process is relatively simple. But could it be that we'll figure eventually out that even our own intelligence is not that special? And so once we figure it out, it will be somewhat disappointing as well, and we'll see, okay, that's how it is, that's how it's done, and then we could eventually reproduce it like perfectly. So I kind of feel that's what we'll see happening, as a new disappointments for humanity or for our egos. But yeah, of course we're not close, but maybe we're not so special. It's not that machines are so far away, because we are not so qualitatively different. Just we still have things to figure out.
Yeah, thank you. This question is we'll probably address it more carefully when we have the lecture on AI. Let me anticipate a couple of points. A couple of risks when asking such broad questions. One is the risk of using anything like could. Anything could. Anything. There are very, very few things that could not be. I could not be a happy married bachelor. That is a contradiction. But I could be, in theory, somehow, just an engine put together by, I don't know, some extraterrestrial forces, for all I know. You can't prove that that is not the case. In fact, life could have been engineered by a civilization that disappeared a long, long time ago as an experiment on this planet. Try to prove me wrong. That could be the case. It's just that it's useless, pointless. It's a bad conceptual mistake to use could as a way of asking questions, unless the could provides something a little bit more concrete. So when talking about possibilities, there are two kinds, and that is crucial. One is the logical kind, meaning it is not a contradiction to assume that we are a civilization created by some extraterrestrial forces. Yeah, there is no contradiction. That is the logical possibility. There is no contradiction in. Then there is the could, as in it's plausible. There's plenty of evidence. We are going there. There are very strong reasons to believe. There are proofs that, etc., etc. So I could fail to be in Bologna on Thursday. Yes, because if they don't give me the passport, I still cannot fly. That is a very different could from I could be a brain in a vat, or an extraterrestrial, or I could be just a piece of artificial intelligence differently engineered by nature, blah, blah. So once we have that clear, out of the way, the point about human exceptionalism seems to me something that needs to be interpreted philosophically as a case of negative, in a good sense of negative, exceptional nature. We don't belong, and that is the main point about our evolution. In a completely natural biological sense, nature has made an amazing mistake, which is humanity. We are a beautiful glitch, as I define humanity in a different context, but a glitch we are, beautiful no matter what. Now, how likely is it that that beautiful glitch might be repeated again and again in the future? I don't know. Seems to be very unlikely. It's like winning the lottery. It happens once. It doesn't happen twice. But could it happen twice? Of course it could. Final point. Imagine we had, and we almost have, the perfect description to the atom, to the molecule of all the muscles in a body, in a human body, and we can describe that to the ultimate final question. There's no question in terms of body, bones, nerves, etc., that we cannot answer. Imagine, and it's plausible. Would that tell us anything about winning that game of tennis the other day, after all that struggling and sweating, at that age, after all? No, of course not. The structural nature of that body and how it behaves and works in that context says nothing about the meaning of the semantics of that experience. Now, as long as we don't get that, we think that all that matters in a very sort of reductionist way is to explain that, well, one day we might have the perfect ultimate neurological description of the brain. We still won't know anything about what it means to have the experience of having a good glass of cold water in the summer on the beach because you're very thirsty. So once you have that clear in mind, all these distinctions, then you will see when we discuss AI that it's what in English is called a red herring, a distraction. A distraction that is based on very poor philosophy. Reductionist Hobbes had pretty much the same view. He thought that thinking was reckoning, in other words, calculating things like horse, horn, therefore unicorn. Well, that kind of thinking is as old as Hobbes, if not older, but it's also as poor as Hobbes' picture of the human thinking was. Final comment. That is exactly what is happening these days. When you hear all the experts in the world talking about the risk of AI, what they are really doing is... Yeah, just a moment. What they is not creating something that is like a human brain, but degrading the human mind to something they are able to develop. Once again, it's not a problem of technology, it's a problem of bad philosophy. Once you impoverish human understanding and human experience to the level of a machine, then you're worried that the machine might be better than the impoverished brain you have just described. Instead of matching A to B, you lower B to A, and then you are worried that A might be better than B. That is poor philosophy, but that is exactly the hype that we are suffering from these days. It will pass. We were discussing blockchain the other day. It was metaverse another time. Just wait until ChatGPT becomes something we used to do some bureaucracy, and we will all be more relaxed. But more on this, I promise, when we have the right lecture on the ethics of AI. I've kept everybody online for long enough. I know that we have 2 hours, but I also know that this is very long done this way. So unless there's something super pressing, maybe we can postpone the next question to tomorrow, when we will start again from soft ethics and the compliance, etc., the point we just highlighted a moment ago. Back to Claudio for the final technical comment. Are we okay?
Everything okay. We can see you tomorrow.
Okay, thank you so much.